extract the soul of smart contracts out of blockchain. And to start with that, I would like to claim this thing, that basically we frequently heard that blockchain solves all the problems in the world. And this is not new, because before that we heard that digitalization is the solution to many humanity problems. I would like to emphasize that digitalization doesn't solve any single problem. The only thing that you can do by converting into a digital world is to make something efficient, more efficient. But you can't create something that will solve certain problems if you can't do something in the physical world. So the digitalization is not the solution, the blockchain is not the solution. The only thing that both of them can do, for instance, they can do something more efficient, including totalitarianism itself. Digital totalitarianism is much, much more efficient than just non-digital one. And this brings us to the topic that there is something wrong with all this blockchain-based smart contracting approach. And what is wrong with that is that it gives two main consequences. It reduces privacy in quite an efficient way, because all the transactions are exposed. The blockchain is the ledger. The ledger is a public entity by default, by definition. And even more, the whole idea of the ledger to be public. It is informational centralization. While the ledger itself is kept in decentralized environment on different nodes, the information is centralized. It is a definition of the ledger. That's why blockchain is the centralization of the information. And the second thing is something I call a socialistic approach or socialistic mess, is when unrelated parties to a certain agreement between some people who would like to set up a contract interrogate into the contract definition and functionality. And these parties are usually, these days in blockchain world, developers and miners. They are not necessary there. And actually that's the governance we usually have in the blockchain world and the world of smart contracts, is where like it's a complete mess. I will have this slide later explaining who trusts whom, but the end take out of that is that there was a promise of removing man in the middle, which started the blockchain industry and smart contracts, but it resulted in introducing more intermediaries like miners and developers instead of government that was used before in the normal world. So again, digitalization makes something more efficient, and in this case, it's a governance. It's not what we're looking for. And it's nothing new made by digitalization. The same thing happened several centuries ago, when originally all financial contracts, shares, and so on were bearer rights. It was a piece of paper signed and stamped by participants, held by the participants. It wasn't an exchange who was responsible for keeping track who owns what. And after it was changed, the exchange became a ledger, much before blockchain. They started keeping tracking of the ownership. And that means that it's not anymore a contract that you hold at home is the proof of your ownership. It is a ledger entry held by an exchange or a governmental body that proves your ownership. And that allows a censorship and the privacy laws and many, many other things. So this has happened in physical world, and now this happens again in so-called blockchain and smart contracting world. There is nothing good about that. And what we actually are looking for is to reform smart contracts in the same way, to reform the financial industry in the same way as Bitcoin reformed the monetary system. And to do that, we need to kill ledgers first. And I would like to say that these things are idiosyncratic for me. Like these terms, I really like to be replaced with the other side. So instead of blockchain as a ledger, we need to move to a time chain as a sequence of committing events, of timestamps, of single-use seals containing no contract data at all. We need to move from distributed ledger technology, this informational centralization, into bearer-right technology, which is a client-side validation. We need to remove some block producers, validators, miners, whatever name they are, out of the contract. And the contract should be only between the voluntary contract parties, which are necessary for contract performance and execution. And we need to take the power out of the community, verifying all the contracts all around the world, to the contract owners who should be responsible of verifying their own state that they are interested in. So that's what we were working on for several years, and this is a technology called RGB, and the idea of technology is to dissect smart contracts out of blockchain. I would like to say that RGB is the most capitalistic smart contract system, because by definition, the contract is an agreement between parties, nothing more. Even if it is smart contract, it means that it is automatically executed, but it is still just an agreement between parties. Nothing changed fundamentally. And in any contract, there is an owners owning certain rights. Maybe they own shares, maybe they own claiming rights, option rights, any other forms of rights, or voting rights. Everything that is defined by the contract is the definition of the rights. And these rights always have a subject, an owner of that rights. And nobody else in the world should not give a flying whatever to the contract, or to what contract parties are doing. That's the definition of censorship resistance. Unless this party is invited, and now it becomes the part of the contract. And it's even more, not should not, but must not. There should be a technical way of preventing other parties interrogating into the contract or even knowing about its existence. So these are highlight very simple statements. Contract is agreement between parties. Owner rules everything. Nobody must not interrogate or track to what contracts parties are doing, unless invited. And today, this is not the way how the blockchain world works, because we have these miners, validators, who shouldn't be trusted, but at the end of the day, users, they do not run the full validating nodes, especially when we are talking not about Bitcoin as money, but about smart contracting. In the same moment, we are moving to the DeFi world with Ethereum, Polkadot, whatever, and these people are not able even to run the fully validated node if they want to, because it's too expensive, and technically these days are mostly impossible. So they have to trust in this trustless setup, and that breaks everything. And I just don't want even to analyze these very weird dependencies between the parties that are working in the smart contracts today. What we should have is very different setup, where there is a clear contract creator or contract issuer who should be trusted by the parties who participate in the contract. For instance, it is a company issuing shares. There is a trust in company in the physical world. And it's okay to move the trust into digital form. That is normal, because you can't not trust company on the shares in the digital space if you don't trust and don't believe in the company's success. That's natural form of trust, and it is preserved in the smart contract. But you don't need to trust to the developers. And the roles of those who create the protocols and those who create the contracts should be separated, with the protocol developers having no impact on the way contract works once the protocol is launched. And the contract developers, they do development of the contract, but they can't update the contract code once it's signed by the parties. And that removes that ability of them to actually control how the contract works by hard forking, for instance, events, or updating the contract as it's common in the Ethereum and DeFi world. So that's actually the way how we can solve the many governmental issues and bring back the contracts properties they are lacking these days. And with these values all together, we have designed this system we call RGB, emphasizing the privacy, scalability, ownership-based logic, and programmability, not challenging the security model of the system. How we achieve that? First of all, how we achieve the scalability? Is there a way to scale? Yes, there is a way to scale, but not on a blockchain. And fortunately, because we are removing everything from blockchain, we can do that. We can scale by running the business logic over the Lightning Network. And is there a way to be private? Yes, by using the zero knowledge, but not just a zero knowledge, also moving the data to the data owners. If you keep your data, you're private by definition because you keep it at your home. It's a bearer right contracts. It's a piece of paper lying in your safe or a file lying on your hard drive. You don't need to expose it to the whole world. And as I said, that's what bearer rights were, and that's what they can become with the digital technology. So we move the contract data out of blockchain. But the first question, we keep them on the client side. But for the first question, how would we prevent a double spending? And the brilliant solution, which were proposed by Peter Todd several years ago, and where all this work has started, is to separate the state data from the ownership data. He put it differently those days, but it's my representation after several years of the development that was happening around this. So there is always an owner of the state, and the ownership of the state is defined on the Bitcoin blockchain. In the same way as somebody owns Bitcoin, he can own the state attached to the same transaction output. And this attachment happens with a technology called single-use seals. Again, this is not technical presentation. We will have a technical event on Monday morning. Everybody who is interested in technical details how this works are invited there. And the owner does validate the state by himself. It is not the task of the blockchain. The state is not present in the blockchain. And it's up to the owner to decide is the state valid or not. And this gives the scalability because whole world doesn't need to validate all the other smart contracts in the whole world like with any blockchain system. So state ownership is not the same as a state validation. Ownership defines who can change the state, and it is controlled at the Bitcoin layer with a Bitcoin script, the same way Bitcoin ownership is controlled. We don't need to introduce anything else there. On the client side, we validate the history of state evolution, all this data that are kept off-chain. And this avoids us to make mistakes many other blockchain smart contracts did, mixing Turing completeness of the state evolution with the validation logic of the ownership. The validation logic should be kept as safe as possible, and it doesn't require Turing completeness. You're working with the public-private key cryptography, and that's all the operations you need to do the ownership control, while the state evolution can be arbitrarily complex. And it also allows to put the contracts over the smart Lightning Network, because you do not keep any state data or any validation logic in the transaction or in the blockchain. So you can abstract now from the blockchain. And that's what you end up. The RGB, a client-side validated data, existed as a directed acyclic graph outside of the blockchain, linked to the blockchain in a provable way, in one directed way, with a single-use seals. It's just different forms of explaining, probably I would skip them for now. And each contract in RGB world is a separate shard. They are not informationally intersecting. And that allows you, again, to scale the contracts. And the native way of doing sharding is having each contract as a separate shard. Again, you can imagine, today, paper world of, not today, but like 50 years ago, everything was done on a paper. And each company maintained the register of shareholders. If you will try to have a single book of all shareholders of all the world companies in a single place, well, that wouldn't work like that. That wouldn't scale. And the native sharding is to separate the accounting of each company. And that's a shard. The same happens with RGB. Each contract is an isolated shard. And blockchain destiny is to die. Instead of bloating blockchain as a ledger with all the state data, we extract the state data into a bearer data, And that's where the contract performs. And the blockchain is reducing, not growing, to keep just time stamping of events, ordering of events, and preventing double spending or double commitments of events with this single-use seal thing. And the way it works is that we develop a thing called taproot. Don't name it taproot. It's basically taproot op return based commitments, where op return commitments are hidden inside taproot script tree. And it's quite interesting thing that it's much, much more advanced and efficient than previous pay-to-contracts or sign-to-contract commitments. And this all gave us automatic capability to be interoperable of all this technology, these days and future technology. So we don't need to modify RGB protocol to adopt L2 when it will happen, for instance, or any existing things that they are out there. So we don't need to modify the core of the protocol anymore. And even with the BH2022, the controversial covenants proposal, you don't actually need to modify Bitcoin blockchain opcodes to get a covenant functionality. You can do it on the client side with RGB, and that makes the soft forks not required. So we separate the concerns in two layers, and we have time-stamping layer replacing blockchain. Well, today it operates as a Bitcoin blockchain, but theoretically you can use much smaller and more efficient blockchain with Bitcoin moved to the client-side validation. We use state channels for the scalability, and we use client-side validated data for actual contract management and business logic. The question is how the business logic operates, and for that we have done this virtual machine called Alluvium. It is a Turing-complete virtual machine for RGB smart contracts. I'm running out of time, so I will be moving faster. And why we needed the dedicated virtual machine is because this virtual machine doesn't have direct memory access. It is not stack-based, but register-based. And it is functional, meaning that each operation is the clear, pure function mapping initial parameters, registers, to a new state of these registers. And that's why we can't use any of those, and we had to design our own state machine. That's how it's programmed. It's an assembly language specially designed for this machine, but it's quite complex. So we are already working on the high-level language called Contractum, which is Haskell inspired, and that's the way how it will be working and looking like. I will skip these details. So the RGB protocol got released this summer, and fortunately it's a final form. Probably there would be some bug fixes. That's why we call it 0.8, not the first version. And probably that's how the contracts are looking. So you can create issue, for instance, RGB20 token, which is a fungible contract, and then you can compile the contract into this form and then query the node on the state of the contract. Of course, command line is not very convenient, so we are also working on user-facing tools which allow more graphical and convenient interface to issue the assets. We will be releasing, we already have a beta versions of MyCitadel wallet done. There will be more releases this year, including the way how you can trade and exchange the contracts created with RGB on the rgbx.io. And RGB doesn't create any other new network. It reuses the Lightning Network. I was giving a talk yesterday, it probably would be in recording later, detailing how exactly RGB interacts with the Lightning Network. Specifically, we had two other protocols called Bifrost and Storm, providing decentralized data storage with incentivization and P2P networking, and altogether they actually constitute the ecosystem that allows you to do a very complex form of smart contracts without having a global state like in Ethereum. And we have 3 nodes implementing the parts of these protocols working all together to get the functionality of the smart contracting. And with that, you can do different forms of assets, including algorithmic stablecoins. You can do an NFTs, and because with the client-side validated data through the Lightning, you can distribute not just the contract data, but additional media content. You actually can do a data distribution decentralized network paid with the Satoshis. And you can do storage or new media distribution with that, which is much more efficient form of NFTs. You can create a new types of DAOs, real DAOs, using the Lightning multi-peer channels and using RGB for state management, and that will be much more scalable with a blockchain-based solution. And finally, what we call a BFI, Bitcoin Finance. You can create a very advanced smart contracts utilizing all these parts of the stack to do things which are not even possible today. So this work is done by these two organizations. The protocol development is by LNPBP Standards Association. It's a non-profit. Actually, we are fundraising, so anybody who can support the development of tokenless protocols, you're welcome. And Pandora Prime, which is a Swiss company creating these products, which will have a monetization strategy, and there we're also fundraising, but in form of the equity, not token. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Unfortunately, no time for questions. We're completely out of schedule. And now I want to welcome Riccardo. He's the host of Bitcoin Italia podcast, and for sure he's gonna kill it. Yes. Come on.
Thank you very much. As Lunatic said, I'm Ricky. I'm the host of the Bitcoin Italia podcast. I'm an activist, and now we're going to talk about El Salvador, because probably what's going on in El Salvador is not what you expect is going on in El Salvador. We are all Bitcoiners in this room, so we remember perfectly these 3 dates, right? I was in my couch in Milan on June 6th, when Jack Mallers walked on the stage in Miami and they announced that El Salvador was making Bitcoin legal tender. After only 13 years, Bitcoin was already currency somewhere. Fantastic. I was super excited. And I was even more excited when President Nayib Bukele made to approve the Bitcoin law in just 1 week. How cool was that? As an activist, I thought that this is a dream. This is the reason why Bitcoin was born. My excitement started to fade when the Bitcoin law took effect on the 7th September 2021. And when I quickly realized that the Salvadorian were given a sort of a Bitcoin wallet called Chivo, there was basically a custodial wallet, strictly KYC'd, strictly closed sourced, so basically a spyware, right? And after a couple of months, there was a huge conference in San Salvador called Adopting Bitcoin, and President Bukele took the stage surrounded by fireworks, and during this speech in front of 1,000 Bitcoiners, some are here among us, he started saying, we just orange-pilled 5 million people here in El Salvador. I was shocked. Because, you know, El Salvador has approximately 7 million people. So, for real, this guy made more than half of the country a Bitcoiner, a true Bitcoiner. And I was also a little upset with my colleagues back then, because we did see a lot of podcasters and journalists go to El Salvador and pay for their breakfast via Lightning in McDonald's and then drive to the Bitcoin beach and spend money on the ocean. But of course you can pay in San Salvador, that's the capital of the state. Of course you can pay in Bitcoin at the Bitcoin beach. It's called the Bitcoin beach, so we should expect that. But what's going on in the rest of the country? What happens if you drive south, close to La Union, in the poorest part of the country? Is it really possible to buy, for example, bananas at the street markets with a Lightning transaction or with a Bitcoin transaction? So that's when we decided, me and my partner Laura, the smartest Bitcoiners in the world, to go to El Salvador ourselves and to do the real tour of the country, to go outside, up in the mountain in Morasan, to visit Metapan, to tour it all, to see if this was actually possible. So we left Milan with no cash, no credit cards, just a wallet stuffed with Satoshi, not many, enough. And we lived in El Salvador 45 days just with that. So was it possible? Was it easy? We have only 20 minutes now. There's a lot I should tell you. If you are interested in it, we made a daily journal, www.bipsbitcoinitaliapodcast.show. It's in English as well. So if you want to dive deeper into our experience there, you should check it out. I think it turned out a pretty cool reading. So we left the country. And when we landed in El Salvador, we immediately realized that probably our life there wouldn't be easy for the next few weeks. Because, for example, you realize that hotels are not that keen on accepting Bitcoin. Only 15% of them, they do accept Bitcoin. And so we had to learn a few tricks, right? What do? Simply, when you want to move around the country, you download from Google the list of the hotels, and you call them all. Hey, I'm Ricky. I'm working on Bitcoin. I have only Bitcoin. Do you accept my Bitcoin? Yes, I can sleep there. No. Then I move on to the next hotel. It's a very effective way to orange peel Salvadorian, for real, so you should try that. And food. Food was easier, but only in the small rural restaurants, because all the big chains, except international big chains, like, as I mentioned already, McDonald's or Pizza Hut, big stores, big restaurants, they don't accept Bitcoin in El Salvador. And but small villages, in small restaurants, they do. Why they do? Because they have a Chivo wallet in their pocket. And your money are real money for them. So instead than losing the client, they're going to try to accept Bitcoin. And they're going to give it a try. So that part was really, really easier for us. For example, car rentals. None of the major car rental companies, AVs, Budget, you name it, none of those accept Bitcoin. They don't even want to hear about Bitcoin. But surprisingly, there are a lot of small businesses all over the country, small owners with a fleet of 20, 25 cars, and they want your Bitcoin because they know they can make money, they can make business with Bitcoin. So this part of the adoption in El Salvador is working. This is our Bitcoin car. It was a shitty 15 years old Mitsubishi, but we paid it in Bitcoin, so for us it was a Lambo, and it was a beauty to drive around the country. You should try that. But what happens when you actually enter a store in El Salvador and you ask to pay in Bitcoin? This is what they show you. This is not my picture. I found it on the internet. As a foreign citizen, I cannot have Chivo because you need your ID number to actually activate the app. But when you go to a store and you ask to pay, this is what they show you. As you can see, this is not a Bitcoin QR code. This is a dollar QR code. Because you see, the Chivo app has two sides, right? One to receive and send Bitcoin, and the other one to receive and send dollars using, they say, the Bitcoin network. We know it's not true, but that's a long story. When you use the QR code as a Salvadorian, payments are instant. Better working than the Lightning Network. Why is that? Because this is just an inner ledger. So nothing actually moves in the blockchain, you know? When you tell the Salvadorian that, sorry, I'm Italian, I cannot have Chivo, so I'm using a different wallet, and my different wallet is not compatible with this QR code. I actually need a Bitcoin QR code. They go wild. They panic. They don't know what to do. Probably they're gonna call their boss if they are not owning the store, because they never did it. So you have actually to convince them that this is possible, that the transaction is gonna be safe, and you have to show them. They don't know what's an on-chain transaction. They don't even know what is a Lightning transaction. They can tell the difference between the two. They don't know even how to do a Lightning transaction. In the first version of Chivo Wallet, the Lightning option was so hidden. Now they fixed that, I have to be honest, with version 2.0. The UI was so poorly designed that I couldn't find how to generate a QR code. I had to call poor Giacomo, do you remember that? Because he was there the week before for the conference. Bro, tell me how to do this because I feel dumb. Okay? So what's going on there is that they have been given a tool called the Chivo Wallet that is been widely adopted, but they don't know nothing about Bitcoin. And why is that? Why is that? Because of this. This moment is where President Nayib Bukele told the Salvadorian about the Chivo project. And you see, every Salvadorian, while we're downloading the app, they will get a $30 airdrop. All you needed to do is download Chivo, put your ID number, so KYCA, and get $30 airdrop, right? Keep this in mind. We're talking about a country where the average salary is $300. So $30 for them, it's a decent chunk of money. So they flooded the app stores to get this thing, right? And what they did after, of course, they spent these $30, right? They used them to pay their thing. And the problem was that once this credit was exhausted, they simply switched back to the cash-based dollar society El Salvador is nowadays and always have been, right? So that's why they don't even know about Bitcoin, because after 3 months of the adoption, we were basically the first crazy Italians that were asking to do a Bitcoin transaction, and they didn't open the Chivo wallet for weeks, if not a couple of months. And this is so true that what you actually see in stores, especially in big store, is this sign, right? They don't tell you, we accept Bitcoin. They tell you, we accept Chivo. So, due to the lack of education, what President Nayib Bukele is actually achieving to do is a rebranding of the Bitcoin logo. It's not Bitcoin for them, it's Chivo. And Chivo is shit. It's so buggy. It eats up your transaction. Lightning transaction, they work very erratically. I know friends in El Salvador, their money disappeared from day or night. When something like that happens to a Salvadorian, they blame Bitcoin. Because they can't tell the difference from the Bitcoin protocol, the one unstoppable form of free money, from the bad state-centered implementation of the Bitcoin protocol they have been given. This is what's going on in El Salvador. This photo, we took this photo in Santa Rosa. This is one of the main centers of Nueva Ideas. Nueva Ideas is actually the political party of Nayib Bukele. He made it, tailor-made it for himself when he was kicked out of the other pre-existing political party. We entered this place because we wanted to talk to hardcore Bukele supporter to understand if at least them, if they knew something about Bitcoin, if they had some form of education. They all had Bitcoin with them. They loved Bitcoin. They were very nice to us. They were hodlers. They proclaimed themselves as hodlers, but nobody knew nothing. And see, this is another very I think disturbing thing that is going on in El Salvador, which is the politicization of Bitcoin. When you talk to Bukele supporters, they love Bitcoin, but they don't get it. When you talk to who's okay with Bukele, They kind of swallow the Bitcoin thing, but they don't trust it, and they stick to their dollars. When you talk to the opposition, rich and wealthy, medium, upper class, usually, they hate Bitcoin. They don't even care. They don't care if this can be a tool that can achieve a better life and better quality of life for their people in their country. Bitcoin is Bukele, and Bukele is Bitcoin for them. And the only reason why this is actually happening, it's because there is a big lack of education. Bukele promised the Salvadorian live in TV 1,000 Bitcoin teacher. He delivered 0. Thank God, we have Bitcoiners, and we are good in fixing stuff. These guys are called Mi Primer Bitcoin. They are a fantastic group of Bitcoin educators. Most of them are Salvadorian. They are teaching real Bitcoin to other teachers, and they do free lessons all over the country. Think about them as our meetups, but even smaller sometimes. And they don't stick to big cities. They go deep in the small villages. They teach to farmers. They teach to workers. They give real Bitcoin education. And there's more. They started a project. We were there while this happened for the first time with a school in San Salvador called La Pacheco. And they are doing there the first Bitcoin diploma, the first course of Bitcoin for school, for free school, for public education, right? This is just a test. It's just one school, one high school in San Salvador. 700 students, though, by the way, so a really big high school. But they are now planning to deliver education to many other schools in the country, possibly to 1.5 million people. What I hold in my hands now, guys, this is historical. This is the first textbook on Bitcoin for public school that has ever been printed. Behold. In 20 years, all our kids are gonna study on a book or on an ebook like that. And you know what's great of this book? There's no fucking Chivo. They don't name Chivo not a single time. This is real grassroots, hardcore Bitcoin education, right? So please, remember this name, Mi Primer Bitcoin, up there on the right corner. You can donate. It's all granted. You can read their roadmap. It doesn't matter how much sats, every sats counts. Support these guys, because this is how we fix the mess that a Bitcoin law is in El Salvador at the moment. It's on them. It's not on the government. But it's a very interesting experiment. We should pay attention to what's going on there. And it's not going to happen soon. As Bitcoiners, we like things to happen fast, instantly. We want this creature to succeed. But the truth is that it's going to take us decades, even in El Salvador, to achieve something. Because this is something so revolutionary that it takes time for people to learn, to grasp it, especially in developing markets. And it's for them, let's keep this in mind, it's for the developing countries that Bitcoin was made, primarily. We have to still focus on El Salvador. We have to be the watchtowers. We have to watch the government what is doing. That's why we are gonna go back there this fall. We're gonna do again the whole tour to chronicle what's going on, what has changed in a year. But this time, we're gonna do more. We're gonna go to Guatemala. We're gonna go to Costa Rica. We're gonna go probably to Panama, probably to Honduras, because if it's something good that Bitcoin could achieve in El Salvador, is that Bitcoin put El Salvador on a map. Nobody knew what El Salvador was before Bitcoin, and it was the country of murderers, right? And Central America is a small part of a continent, so the word spreads. And other community, they want to do what Bitcoin did in El Salvador. They want to do what the Bitcoin Beach did in El Salvador. They want to see if they can start a revolution from the bottom. They want to use Bitcoin to create a circular economy that is going to benefit them all. And they're going to probably do it the right way. This is what I want to see. But the question here is, these experiments are better than El Salvador? Is grassroots Bitcoin adoption better than state-driven adoption? To be honest with you, I think it is. I think it's the only possible adoption because it's with the people, right? So Bitcoin doesn't need a law. Because doesn't need a law, because laws are made by states, by dictators, by government, and usually those people, they have their own agenda, right? They twist things to achieve what their goal are. Bitcoin is freedom, Bitcoin is anarchy. The legal tender is an aberration ultimately because Bitcoin doesn't really need a law, because we should always keep in mind that Bitcoin is already law itself. Thank you.
One question. That was great. We have time for one question. Fast one. Somebody? Okay. Yay, question.
Very simple question. I just want to know, can we get copies of that textbook from somewhere? Is there somewhere we can order that, download a PDF of it, whatever?
This is actually the second version of the book. A third version is being printed as we speak. And by the way, it was reviewed by that young Bitcoiner guy called Giacomo Zucco. I don't know if you ever heard about him. It's a new guy that just hit the scene. So no, I don't think you can buy it. But the intention of the guys that are sponsoring this thing, it's called Ibex Mercado, by the way. They are very active down in Central America, and their payment methods on Lightning are instant fast. They want to actually make the book common creation. So it's going to probably be available to anyone to copy, to distribute, to read, to use. So we'll see that. Christmas time. Know your customers, us.
Thank you, Riccardo.
Thank you,
great.
guys. Thank you so much. Anita Posch now is gonna kick asses.
Now we have Anita. She also doesn't need any presentation. Everybody knows her. So please, Anita, welcome on our small stage, but with great guests.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here, to be back. The last time I was here, and the first time was in 2019, I was interviewing other speakers, and now I'm a speaker myself. That's great. And yeah, Riccardo, great speech. Thank you very much. I'm completely agree with your the last things you said about grassroots adoption. So, yeah, nonetheless, I want to introduce myself. My name is Anita Posch. I'm the author of this book, Learn Bitcoin. I still have got some copies downstairs, and I can also sign it for you if you're interested. And I'm also the founder of Bitcoin for Fairness, which is a non-profit initiative whose goal it is to foster grassroots adoption on the ground in the global south, because that's where I think Bitcoin is needed the most. And we are doing this also by sharing knowledge. So I'm not going here to tell them, oh, I'm the right person, I'm telling you now how this works. I'm going there, sharing my knowledge with them on one level to then help them to set up their own structures and their own communities. So that's a picture of Bitcoin Ekasi in South Africa. a circular economy, and the senior guide here, Lufando, on my side, he has now set up the first Raspberry Blitz that I brought when I was there, and the first channels are open, so look out for Bitcoin Ekasi and open some channels. Yeah, pack your bags, let's go home. Bitcoin is useless. That's what the mainstream media is telling us, or many so-called technologists. It uses too much energy, we don't need it, and I'm here to tell you the opposite. I think Bitcoin is the embodiment of human rights. And for some, maybe anarchist, libertarian Bitcoiners, the United Nations is not the right organization, but I think in general, the Declaration of Human Rights is a good document for a sort of a, let's say, moral, ethical standard for all people in the world. But first, let's take a look at the state of the world. Why do we need Bitcoin? 45% of the global population live in authoritarian regimes. They don't have full democracies. Actually, only 6.4% people live in countries like Germany, France, whatever, yeah, in Europe and in the US, which are full democracies. All the others are either flawed democracies or they are really full dictatorships or authoritarian regimes. If we take a look at a map of this democracy index, you can see a sort of pattern, you know. We start on the right-hand side, Russia, China, over Africa and going into South Africa. The dark red are the countries where life is the worst, in a way, for people. They have the least freedom there. And the top country in that sense is Afghanistan, Myanmar, North Korea, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Syria, and Central African Republic. If we take a look at the map of public corruption, we see the same pattern. So there seems to be some sort of correlation between corruption and democracy. And then I have the world wealth map, and we see the same pattern. So in countries with dictators and authoritarian leaders, it seems, where democracy is not that good, it seems that people are poorer. And the poorest countries are in Africa and the Middle East. So there, I guess, are so many reasons for that that I can't explain, but I think that one of the reasons definitely has been colonialism. And this was also the reason why the British pound basically was the first, so the British was the first monetary hegemon. They had basically the global monetary power because everyone was always, if they were doing trade or something like that, they were counting in British sterling. And the British pound still was pegged to gold. But after the First World War, their power deteriorated. And after the Second World War, we all know the US Americans were the winners of the Second World War. And many European countries sent all their gold to the US to not be stolen from by the Nazis. And so the US had basically all the gold in the world, and they were the winners of the war. And so they had the power to say, like in 1944, it was decided in Bretton Woods that the US dollar is now the global reserve currency, and all other currencies are exchanged to the US dollars have an exchange rate. And this was still on the gold standard, so it was really backed to something that was something worth, where energy was put in. And in 1971, in the 60s, the power of the US also deteriorated, Vietnam War and all these kinds of things. And also the economies, the growing economies needed more money in a way than that was pegged to gold. So Richard Nixon abolished the gold standard in 1971 and basically rendered all currencies in the world, because they were all exchanged to the US dollar, to fiat money. And fiat is Latin and means let it be done. So basically our money has only value because it's legal tender, because the nation state tells us to use it. And so that way, the US knew they will be running into a problem, and in 1974 they reached an agreement with Saudi Arabia and the other OPEC states that oil may only be sold for US dollars. And that's what we call today the petrodollar, which is basically backed by war, because the US Americans guaranteed the OPEC countries military protection for them to only sell it for US dollars. Today we have some countries selling it already for yen and ruble, so also you see the power of the US dollar is deteriorating more and more. So now let's take a look what this means to the global financial order. So Article 1 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And then we have something like a global regulatory scheme made from nation states. Mostly it's unelected people in these organizations, but they decide who is allowed to spend money or to own money or not. And the result is that we have 1.7 billion, and I think in real life it's more people, because these are the household heads of the households. So it's around 2 or 3 billion people who are unbanked, and most of them are also women. Another problem resulting from these regulations are, for instance, capital controls and sanctions that are put on nation states, but in real life, the poor people or the general population is suffering, not the elites. They work it out in a way. And banks are broken. So in Africa, it's not easy to use a bank. It's first very costly. They have higher fees than we have. It's not possible to send from every African country to another. I have a friend in Zimbabwe, and she told me it's the first time that I can pay my freelancer in Kenya directly, and I did it with Bitcoin. I could never do that with the banking system. Then there is, of course, understandingly, a general mistrust in banks, and high fees, I said that already. So, another example of what is not equality in my sense. There's 14 African countries, that's about 200 million people in Africa, who still need to use the West African franc or the Central African franc. That means the franc is pegged to the euro, and what I think is the worst, they have to deposit half of their foreign exchanges with the French treasury. So that's not what I call independence, that's what I call monetary colonialism. And how does Bitcoin fix this? I guess you all know. It fixes it because everyone is treated the same, and Bitcoin is a neutral, global, borderless money. You can't exclude anyone, and that's good. Then, the right to privacy. To be honest, I didn't know that this is actually an article in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence. So, but what is the reality? In reality, a few months ago, we had the general manager of the Bank of International Settlement saying, in regards to CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, at the moment, we don't know who's using a $100 bill today. Yeah, that's the great thing about cash. But the key difference with the CBDC is the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability, and also we will have the technology to enforce that. Privacy, bye. So I hear many people then tell me, yeah, but I've got nothing to hide, so I don't care. It's okay if they know everything I do. So the thing is, it's really not about that you don't have anything to hide. It's about the fact that your political opponent, or maybe you're gay or lesbian or something like that, and in some countries this is still illegal, they can make a case out of it against you. And that's the reason why privacy is so important. And it's also important to support human rights activists and people who fight for freedom for other people and who are endangered if their privacy was leaked. And I mean, it's even not easy here in our country. So actually you have to pay money. You have to know you can use a VPN, for instance, that costs a little bit of money. But people in the global south, they don't even have the money to pay for that. Most of them, sadly, use WhatsApp. And they think WhatsApp and Facebook is the internet. So privacy is actually luxury in a way. And I think Bitcoin fixes this because it's pseudonymous. And if you use it the right way, it gives you enough plausible deniability to still stay so private that nobody can harm you. And I believe and I hope that Bitcoin developers and on other layers like layer 2 or layer 3, new methods of using Bitcoin will become even more private. Next big problem is inflation. So now it's the first time that in Europe, for 100 years ago, I mean, we also had hyperinflation, but everybody has forgotten because everybody is dead. So in Austria, we have like now 10% inflation, yeah? And energy prices are going like that. But still, Zimbabwe is the #1 country. In July, they had 500% inflation. In Cuba, 135, Turkey 132, Sri Lanka 100, Lebanon 90, and so the list goes on. Interestingly enough, Venezuela is only at 67%. And so this is of course a big problem because you can't save money in your local currency. I mean, the Zimbabwean dollar is a joke currency basically, and everybody knows that. People know that. That's from a Zimbabwean article. And the reason for all that inflation in Zimbabwe is definitely excessive money printing, we know that, and looting. So the elites are totally corrupt and loot all the money from the people. Yeah, how does Bitcoin fix this? 21 million cannot be inflated. And this is also, when I say that to people in my talks there, they understand that immediately. It's quite different to hear where people say, why do we need Bitcoin? They understand immediately. And speaking of corruption, ruling elites behind Zimbabwe's disappearing gold. Every year, gold worth 1.5 billion is being looted by the elites. And then people wonder why there are no good hospitals and things like that. Or ministers buy themselves new Range Rovers, but they don't fix the potholes on the streets. So that's why they need Range Rovers. How does Bitcoin fight corruption? Blockchain is a transparent ledger. If you have a budget or a project, you can also audit the government. You can audit it. Yeah, very important article. The freedom of speech. And what does this have to do with Bitcoin? Yeah, in many of these countries, you are not free to say your opinion. So for instance, when I do interviews in Zimbabwe, I always ask, what shall I not ask? What is okay, what's not okay? And everybody tells me, please don't ask anything about the government. So people in Zimbabwe, for instance, they are beaten dead because they are members of the opposition. And the guy on the right, he is in jail now because he's wearing a yellow T-shirt. Because a few weeks ago, the Zimbabwean government forbade the yellow color because it's the color of the opposition. So that's why Bitcoin is important, because spending money is an expression of your opinion. If I support a political party, I express my opinion. And that's why it's important that we can use Bitcoin as this tool. Bitcoin transactions are uncensorable. And as I said before, it gives you enough privacy if you use it the right way. Hand in hand with freedom of speech goes freedom of association, because if you can't express your political opinion, if you can't meet up with your fellow demonstrators or freedom fighters, then you basically have no political power anymore. And here I have an example from Nigeria in 2019, I think, 2020. There were the NSAS demonstrations against police brutality. And the feminist coalition of Nigeria started to collect donations to support the demonstrators, like with food and drinks and things like that. And then the Central Bank of Nigeria cut off their banking account. And they remembered, hey, there's something like Bitcoin. We spoke about that. And then they started to set up a BTC Pay server and could get donations again and support the demonstrators. So Bitcoin's privacy and uncensorability enables people to cooperate against dictatorships. Freedom from discrimination. Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political, etc. So, in many of these countries, you have limits of the amount of money you are allowed to use. So they enforce it basically. In Zimbabwe, the online banking tool, the centralized online, it's from the state, limits your transactions in a month to, at that time, $600. And a day, you are allowed to send $37. That might be much for people generally in Zimbabwe, but those mostly don't have bank accounts anyhow. But I mean, imagine you have a business. I mean, how do you wanna work, you know? And also, as an example, in 2016, the Indian Central Bank and the Indian government, from one day to the other, they said the 500 and the 1,000 rupee notes are not valid anymore. And the people there had 2 or 3 days to exchange the money on the bank if they had a bank account. But the thing was, it was a weekend. So the result was, and the reason for this, that what the Indian government says, was to fight money laundering and black money. The result was that 82 people died and millions of people didn't have any money anymore because most of them work in the informal sector. So they had their stash of money at home and it was worthless from one day to the other. And the effect on the black money problem, it hasn't gone away. It didn't have any effect at all. And so, freedom from discrimination, you all know, Bitcoin is permissionless. Anyone can use it regardless of age, wealth, gender, whatever. And even more important, not more important, equally important, nobody can take it away from you. Then the right to free movement goes also hand in hand with that. It's actually also a part of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So you might have the right to free movement, but usually you can't take your money with you. And even more, if you have to flee a country, you need to be fast. You can't go to the ATM, which might be closed already, but you can take your Bitcoin even in your head. You don't even need a smartphone or a USB stick if you're if your mind is so clear to remember 12 or 24 words in the right order, then you can move over borders with all your money in your head. So take your money with you. Bitcoin is borderless, and that's how it enforces the right to free movement. The right to own property, so many rights that Bitcoin enforces. 75 economies still limit women's right to manage assets. There are countries in which women are not allowed to own property or to inherit. So they never can have some sort of land that could be a security to get a credit or to get a bank account to support their businesses, their informal businesses. And it's mostly in the Middle East and North Africa, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and in East Asia and Pacific. And guess what? People allows that. So anyone can use Bitcoin secretly, and you can use it as a collateral for microloans in the future, and I hope in the very near future. So that people in these countries who don't have money, they can save $1 a month on the Lightning Network, for instance. And when they have $10, they might get a microloan for $50 or something like that. And that is really empowering for many, many small businesses. So this quote is from Daniel Erickson, the CEO of Transparency International, which is fighting corruption. And he says, in authoritarian contexts where control rests with a few, social movements are the last remaining check in power. It is the collective power held by ordinary people from all the walks of life that will ultimately deliver accountability. Sounds like Bitcoin, huh? For me, Bitcoin is exactly that tool. It's a checks on power for governments and also enables people to become more free. So by using Bitcoin, I mean, it sounds not logical, but by just using Bitcoin here, you support freedom fighters globally and help the world to make it more fair. And that's also why my initiative is called Bitcoin for Fairness, because I believe that that's the single most important argument for Bitcoin. I mean, there are many important arguments, but I see it as some sort of historical reparation to make the wealth split or divide between the gap between the rich north and the poor south a little bit smaller. I mean, Bitcoin is not it won't fix the general differences between rich and poor. There will always be people who have more money than the others, but it just allows everyone the same chances in a way. So, and also why I'm speeding up, so I'm speeding up my work in Africa and these countries is because I believe that with more peer-to-peer use, people there use Bitcoin in peer-to-peer groups, peer-to-peer, non-KYC. So I think the more and more and more and more people using it there will create facts for us here and are basically a tool to fight regulation. Yeah, so just a few pictures of where I have been and what we've done. That's a picture of Bitcoin Ekasi in South Africa. And these are the surfer kids. So Herman Vivier had a surf school, and he heard about Bitcoin Beach and thought, I could do the same. And the children get free surfing lessons because it educates them, and they also have every day some hours of school. They have their own teacher there. And they also learn how to use a Lightning wallet and to receive and send payments. It's a circular economy in a township with 5,000 people. And it's interesting that in Bitcoin Ekasi, also the first shop owner to accept Bitcoin in her shop was a woman like Mama Rosa in El Salvador. Right hand is again Luthando. Luthando is the senior surf coach, and he's also the senior Bitcoin coach. So he's the guy who goes around in the township and tries to convince the shop owners to accept Bitcoin. And all the coaches are paid in Bitcoin. So they are paid from the surf school, go home to the township and spend their money there daily. That's Nosichle's shop, and now 10 of 17 shops are already accepting Bitcoin. And as I said, the children sometimes get a little bit of extra money, you know, when they've done something good or something, and then they can buy a soft drink or something like that in the township. That was at the University of Lusaka in Zambia, some hardcore Bitcoiners on that image. So I actually really met Bitcoin maxis there. They were maxis before I came. And they were so happy that I did these events because then they met the first others. One guy from Zimbabwe was driving 6 hours by bus to come to my event. And he said to me, I'm from Bulawayo and I think I'm the only one. And then we found out, no, there are 3 or 4 already in Bulawayo too. And that's the great thing about doing that work, because basically it's also about connecting people and enabling them to do more in their own way. And what I'm also very proud and want to say, there are now the first Bitcoin miners in Zimbabwe. It's a small operation, but it's powered by solar. And I'm very happy to see that, because the guy who is doing it, he also wants to use it as an educational possibility to educate other people about mining, because actually, I mean, it's weird, but electricity is very cheap in Zimbabwe. I don't know why, but the problem is it's very unreliable. Yeah, so what's up next? I'm flying from here tomorrow to Zimbabwe, and I'm doing meetups and workshops again. And we started a 2-page brochure for meetups to hand it out there to explain why Bitcoin and how they can start using Bitcoin. Because most people come to a meetup, then you tell them, go to this website, do this, and then they go home and they do nothing. And then we have the idea to do decentralized Bitcoin podcasts in local language. So help podcasters to become podcasters in their language and also enable it value for value so that they can earn Satoshis directly. Yes, my book is going to be released in Portuguese and in Italian. And so I also hope that at the end of the year, it's planned that I'm going to Brazil, and then Ghana, Nigeria, and again, Bitcoin Ekazi. And yes, thank you very much.
That's amazing. We don't have time, but it's lunchtime. If somebody's really hungry, can just go and grab something to eat. But if somebody wants to do some questions, we can do that as well. So, any questions?
Donate. No, you can also help by like translating stuff or things like that. Yeah. So, or reach out to me, tell me what your skills are, and I try to find a topic or something to do for you. I mean, what would be great is like I should talk with someone about enabling podcasts easily without having to pay for hosting for these people. But other than that, yes, I mean, really donate. And if you know any companies that are maybe interested in sponsoring Bitcoin for Fairness, that would be cool too.
You showed the picture of a wallet. What kind of wallet is that?
I showed a picture of a wallet.
They said it was by Koa.
That was Wallet of Satoshi.
Okay, so thank you very much, Anita. As we're gonna try to catch up in the lunch break, so I'm sorry, but we'll be back on